dairy products and eggs, and that's causing war. And they said, we're trying to create a world of peace, so we're eating lower on the food chain, so there's enough food for everyone to eat. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. You know, that's really a noble thing to do. And I said, what's the other reason that you're vegetarians? And they said, well, the other reason we're vegetarians is, do you know what the animals go through that people are eating? Are you aware of the suffering of these animals? We don't want to contribute to that. And I said, well, I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me. And they said, well, one guy said, well, he told me a little bit. He just told me how the animals are confined in very small cages, typically very often banging their heads against the bars, driven into insanity by this terrible hyper-confinement, how their bodies are routinely mutilated in a variety of ways. They're castrated without anesthesia, their beaks are chopped off, their tails are docked, their teeth are clipped, their ears are notched. All this horrible violence towards these poor animals, the suffering, and then they're pulled out, hung upside down, their throats are slashed. And so it was like he pulled the curtain back and revealed something that in our society we just don't talk about. And we don't talk about the routine, horrible ocean of suffering that we're inflicting on millions of animals, actually billions of animals every single day on this earth, and we pretend like it doesn't matter. And so for me, I could feel it in my bones, this really matters. I'm not going to participate. So actually, for me it was a wonderful experience because not only did I learn the truth about animal agriculture, at least I got a glimpse into the truth, actually, so much more to it than that, but I got a glimpse. And I also had this living example of a whole community of 900 people who were thriving on a plant-based diet, and I was eating meals with them every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that was it. I had never eaten meat again in my life since that day. I heard from this fellow back in 1975, that was 41 years ago. I've never eaten meat in my life since then. And the good news also is that in the last 41 years, I've never been to a doctor once. And I've never taken a pill or anything. I mean, just, I didn't do it for my own health, but it's the greatest thing you can ever possibly do for your health is move to a plant-based way of eating and living, because animal-based foods are toxic. They concentrate all kinds of physical toxins. It concentrates heavy metals, PCBs, dioxins, nuclear radiation. These animals turn plant-based foods into saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying and inflammatory animal protein, huge amounts of sewage and waste. And when we eat that stuff, it just makes us very sick, for sure, which is, of course, very profitable for the medical or pharmaceutical complex, which I have not participated in. And so if we just want to, essentially, like from my point of view, I never became a vegetarian or a vegan for my health. I did it for the health of the cows and pigs and chickens and the ecosystems and hungry people. But I discovered that it's also the best thing we can do for our own health too, because that's essentially the teachings of ancient China and really the teachings of the wisdom traditions of the planet. And so whatever we sow, we reap, right? If you sow melons, you're going to get melons, you're not going to get carrots. So if we're sowing seeds of violence and brutality and disease and suffering, are we going to really create for ourselves a life of joy and freedom? It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So we have to understand that we cannot follow the stories and narratives of our society and eat animal foods and expect to create a world of peace and freedom and justice and harmony and health for ourselves. It's never happened and it never will happen. But the good news, again, is that we can change the way we're living. Individually, we can say, okay, I understand this now. I'm going to sow seeds of kindness. I'm going to buy foods and eat foods and support people who are raising plant-based foods, who are growing foods organically, who are that are whole foods. And when we do that, we're sowing seeds of joy and freedom and peace and abundance and health in others, and we're going to reap that in ourselves. So actually, being kind and loving to others in an ironic, kind of strange way is the most selfish thing we can do in terms of being, that's how we have to be happy and healthy ourselves, is by being kind and loving to others. And that's really what the ancient Chinese traditions have emphasized. And the reason, actually, the farm itself, where I learned all this, was based on Buddhism. It was based on Buddhist teachings. So veganism actually is a new thing, but it goes back. It has deep roots. And I learned that years later. I went vegan in 1980 in San Francisco, and a few years later, and then a few years after that, in 1984, I was living in meditation centers and around the San Francisco Bay Area, and then I decided to become a Zen monk. So I shaved my head and became a Buddhist monk, and lived in Korea, and found myself for the first time in a community that was vegan, and they had been practicing veganism since the 1200s, so for 750 years, based again on the Chinese wisdom of compassion and kindness for other beings, on the Buddhist teachings of nonviolence, of not harming other beings. And so then when I was in Korea as a Zen monk, I realized that this vegan living is not this new idea. It's an ancient wisdom tradition that goes back centuries. It goes back actually thousands of years. And it's really our own hearts speaking to us. It's our own inner wisdom expressing. And also I found that through meditation and intense meditation for long periods of time, that we can discover a deeper truth about ourselves. We can get beyond the conditioned mind. You know, through intensive meditation, I think we can discover, at least for me, I discovered that my mind had been colonized, in a sense, by a toxic program of competition and domination and exploitation and abuse of others, and a lot of that was eating animal foods, but it's also participating in a whole system based on consumerism and violence towards animals and hungry people and ecosystems, and through meditation to sort of extract consciousness out of the rambles of that kind of conditioning and realize that what the true nature of our consciousness actually is like the sky. It's free and it's unencumbered, and it's of the nature of radiant awareness and joy and loving kindness. That's our true nature. And yet that consciousness, when we're born into this society, gets shut down, and we get abused, and we contract, and then we find ourselves struggling in a system of violence. And so that's what you're going to have with animal agriculture. Animal agriculture creates a culture of violence. It is a culture of violence. In the World Peace Diet, I go into all this in more detail. I don't have time to do it now, but if you're interested, you can read the World Peace Diet. I talk about the whole history of this, how animal agriculture evolved actually in the Western Mediterranean, in Western Asia, in the Eastern Mediterranean region, and gave rise essentially to a wealthy elite class, gave rise to war, gave rise to slavery, gave rise to the domination of women, gave rise to the role model of boys to emulate of a hard, tough, disconnected male capable of violence against animals and women and rival herders. I mean, animal agriculture gave rise to the patriarchal society, gave rise to science based on dominating and exploiting nature, dominating female animals, seeing females as mere breeders to be dominated. So we're the wealthy elite that eats a lot of meat and dairy. And this is the world, you know, essentially this arose as a small-scale thing 10,000 years ago when people started to own wild sheep and then wild goats, and then later, about 2,000 years later, wild cows. But it spread gradually throughout the world. I mean, through the Eastern Mediterranean to the Northern Mediterranean to Central Asia, into all throughout Asia to Europe to North and South America to Africa. It's been spreading, and it's still spreading. I can see it spreading right out the window through McDonald's and Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken and Cargill and Monsanto and the World Bank and the IMF and this whole, I call it the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, medical complex. Banking complex. We get this vast complex. It gets very wealthy on sick people, on environmental devastation, and on war. And it's not good for us. We shouldn't participate in it. If we're eating meat and dairy products and eggs, we're directly contributing to that. We're contributing to violence and misery, environmental devastation and disease, and it's not in our best interest. Why do we do it? We do it because of the communities we're raised in, and because the media is controlled, basically, by these corporations. So we have to gather together like this in communities of sanity and health and sustainability. And that's what vegan restaurants are. Vegan restaurants are communities of sustainability and sanity and health and kindness, and we can create more and more of these communities. That's the key of the community. Because of communities, we're committing violence and abuse, and if we were born, if each one of us was born as a cow or a pig or a chicken, I wouldn't have to talk about this. You would know it. You would know exactly what this system is all about. You'd be experiencing it yourself. But since we're born as humans, we don't see it. We just think, well, this is just how it is. So we have to understand that we've been born into this system, and it's not in our best interest. And if we want to have a world for our children then the greatest gift we can give to the world and to ourselves is to question these official stories